Welcome to the second round of second International Grandmaster Chess Tournament Indore. Last year we had a first version of this and now we have a second edition. We have as many as 131 participants in this from 16 countries. The participants include 10 Grandmasters, 2 Women Grandmasters and 25 International Masters. All players from all over the world. 16 countries have been participating, and the US and Vietnam, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Russia. The top seed is Grandmaster P. Inyan of India, and the second seed is Russian Grandmaster Boris Shevchenko. Now let's go and have a look at the first board between Inyan and Rajendra. Inyan has already won this game, and let's see how the game proceeds, how the game took place. Inyan started with d4, that's a common opening he plays, and then Roshan has replied with Queen's Gambit, and now this is Queen's Gambit declined. A standard variation played by world champions for last over a century, almost 150 years. This has been one of the most popular openings. Queen's Gambit declined. Let's see, there have been various defenses, and let's see which opening is chosen by the local Rajendra. Okay, he goes for the interesting variation. Variation in which he combines with Cambridge Spring as well as Lakhs. I think he's going to play the Lakhs defense with knight e4 to come, but let's see. Rook c1, okay, it's standard, and then now bishop d3. So now we look at the actual variation, the classical variation. The move h6 doesn't match with the classical variation. In case black takes pawn into c4 here and bishop into c4 and then knight d5, there would be bishop g3. So if one has to play the classical variation of the Queen's Gambit decline, then h6 is not a great insertion. As you can see, now position is a bit better for white because the recourse of d into c4 is not available to black. D into c4, bishop into c4, knight to d5 leads to bishop g3 with an advantage to white. So black tries to open up the queen side. White has delayed the castling, but white is going to castle in a move. The position looks roughly equal, but a closer look will reveal that black has a bishop at c8 which doesn't have any future. Black is going to struggle for developing, finding a good place for the piece, because chess is nothing but a warfare game, a war between white army and black army. And unless every army member, every soldier is not participating, it's not going to be a great game. So let's see how Roos tries to tackle, but I think Inyan has already got some slight advantage. Let's see how the advantage was eventually converted. So a4, a very interesting move, stopping the queen side expansion. It doesn't actually stop, but creates a lot of weaknesses in black's position. Black has managed to get some space on the queen side, but as we can see, some critical problems will come due to the weak c6 pawn. An excellent move by the top seed Inyan. He wants to weaken the control of c5 square. One of the black pieces must capture on f6. Capturing the pawn would be really dangerous because it would lead to a weakening of the king side and could have dire consequences. Needless to say, black must capture the bishop, and not black cannot capture the knight. Black must capture the bishop with one of the minor pieces, knight or bishop. And let's see, in either case, white gets control of c5 square, which turns out to be crucial. So an excellent move, aiming for knight exchange. If knights are exchanged here, then black simply loses the c6 pawn. So okay, black has solved the problem of the queen bishop temporarily, but the bishop has not really grown to a better position. It's still in a bad position, and the entire queen side seems to be weak. White has castled a bit late, but look at what has happened. Black has several weaknesses and a bad piece compared to white's pieces. White has all very powerful pieces. White knight is going to land at e5 soon. Another knight could land at c5. And white has a better center control. White has better pieces, and black is already struggling to defend the position. A logical move to overprotect a weak point and creating a square for the bishop, but doesn't really work out. Knight c5 attacks the bishop. And now excellent move again. Equally good to take rook into c5 if black rook had not been on c8. But now in case of rook into c8, black would be able to move back the knight to d7 and get c5 with roughly equal position. So white correctly takes with the pawn. What's important now is that the d file is open. White's rook is no longer powerful on c1, but the d line will be the crucial access point for white pieces, as black will have to struggle defending the queenside pawns, and white would have a free movement compared to black, owing to the bad position of the black bishop, which is not likely to take part in the game. A particular battalion, when left out of a main war field, it's not a great thing for any side to happen. Black will be playing a battle on the king's side or in the center without the b7 bishop, and let's see how the things go in favor of white slowly. The knight has been restricted to. The black knight has no access to central squares. The black bishop has no access to any part where the battle is actually taking place, and the bishop is restricted to its own arena. Black tries to simplify a few pieces. See, the black pawn which has come in white territory is now weak. White subtle move attacks the pawn with the queen. So black gives up the pawn with the hope of getting some counter play. If the pawn is taken, then the black wants to take on c5 the pawn, but white took it. So a pawn exchange has been taken place. As a pawn exchange has taken place here, it has been permitted by white. And what has happened? Black knight has been exchanged with white bishop. Both were good pieces. And now what we look at is a badly placed bishop on queen side for black, and white has an active knight which could be actively placed at king side or the queen side. It is ready to penetrate on the black squares, and we'll see slowly black is bound to get into some trouble. So knight attacking the black rook, driving away the rook, and now knight moves to a very important square from which it could jump to a5 and to b6 and to d6 at different moments. So a lot of options for white knight, no options for black bishop. Black bishop has only one move, and the bishop can keep on moving to that square, making no sense really. So black moves the rook to an open file. There is no point in keeping the rook in the closed file, and white is ready to advance the pawn. So the pawns are now moving, and the c6 pawn could be targeted soon. So black is playing more or less the forced moves, the accurate moves, but the damage has already been done. Black's position is untenable, and that's what we see. Again, an excellent move, trying to exchange the rooks and take the pawn, but white is a very simple recourse to. White allows black to take the pawn. So let's see what happens if the pawn is taken. Then black would lose a piece. Queen, rook into d1, rook into d1, queen into b4, there would be a rook d8 check coming, and black eventually loses the a8 bishop. White has a time to save the c4 knight in between. So we can look at a variation: rook into d1, rook into d1, queen into b4, then rook d8 check, and king h7, and then white could exchange the queens, and then eventually the bishop would be lost, as it has very few squares, and the game would be lost. Yet that might have been a better recourse than this, because now white is playing further. White wants to put the knight on b6 if required, so that the attack against the b pawn is closed. So black, again the difference from taking the pawn due to the tactical possibility, but now it's further dominated. The black pieces are further dominated. Look at the difference in the quality of the minor piece. There's nothing really weak about Black's king. Both kings are equally weak. Now Black's rooks are as good as White's rooks. Black's queen is little worse placed than White's queen, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is the bad position of the bishop and the powerful position of White knight. This advantage alone is good enough to win. As we see, a very nice classical game. Black wants to double the rooks and pin the pawn. White fortifies the d4 square. So now White's plan is easy. White is going to double in the d file and then move the knight at the appropriate moment. Black decides to exchange queens here, hoping for some counterplay against the weak b4 pawn, but the knight is powerfully placed and there is no real counterplay possible. Rook d4, supporting the b4 pawn. So now it's compulsory to exchange queens probably. Black has nothing better and White takes with the pawn, which means that White doesn't have to keep the rook on d4 busy defending the pawn. It's very important to have activity of pieces, and if your pieces are guarding pawns, then it's not going to be a great thing, because then we are going to have it either way. Either our pieces defend our own forces or our pieces go and attack the enemy forces. Both cannot be done. So White is reducing the liabilities of weak pawns so that White will be able to go on the for the final assault and start winning the pawns. Black makes a reasonable attempt to exchange the pawns to weaken the d6 square, but it's not going to happen. And see, White king is so safe that even if Black gives a check with the rook, White doesn't gain anything. Black's pieces are and pawns are now getting under attack. So e4 pawn has been, e6 pawn has been attacked, and the pawn is going to be lost. But a nice move by Black, making use of the b8 rook. So now the pawn temporarily seems to have been given, but White is a very subtle threat now. Rook b1 and rook b8. White wants to move the rook to the b file, rook b1 and rook b8, after which Black will lose the bishop, which means that Black has to start taking steps against loss of a bishop. So White goes to the square, and White takes the pawn first, intending to play the rook to e8. As you can see, White goes h4, White is just strengthening the position. Black has to mark time, White just takes some time, and now White goes to. At this stage, Black realizes that Black is not only going to lose all his pawns, the knight on d6 could come to f5, winning the kingside pawns. The rook could go to a7 and then to a6, taking the pawn, again go back to a7. Black is just hopeless against any possible move by White. White has various ways of attacking the Black king. Black bishop and Black rook will remain in the in the back rank, giving no threat. If you have noticed, Black has not given a single threat in this position. I think activity of pieces is very important, and Black has not been able to get any activity. As a result, we can see that a game has become very one-sided. Black decided to give up the battle. Black resigned the game here, as very soon he would be several pawns down. Look at the time taken. White has hardly taken 20 minutes for the game, and Black has taken about an hour, less than an hour. So a very one-sided game, a great game by top seed Grandmaster Indiana of Tamil Nadu. And the game is already over. Let's go to the next board, the second board, where the Russian Grandmaster Savchenko is playing his match. So Savchenko has a very interesting position. He is playing against Pushkar Dere. Pushkar Dere is from Maharashtra. He has had some very successful results recently. And we have a position where there is a lot of attack, counter attack, but Black has, as you can see, Black has defended and Black has several pawns around. In fact, the game is over. Let's go back to this game quickly. Let's see how the Russian strategy against some openings is. Though India is now the strongest chess playing nation, probably stronger than Russia apparently, but the average Russians still have a advantage of knowing a lot of things. That is, the Soviet school of chess really contributed a lot to the strategy. And if you are a youngster in Russia, you are much better off to play chess than someone in England or USA, because Russian, you have a good player in the neighborhood, and just like India, you have in some of the states, in Tamil Nadu, in Telangana, Andhra, a lot of players play, and you always have a player equally good in your neighborhood, and you have a chance of learning a lot from your friends. And here is a game where we started with a simple opening, and subsequently it has gone into a complicated. So there we go, Savchenko plays French defense, standard opening for some top players. 100 years back there were world championships in which both white and black, both the champion and the challenger played this opening sometimes. And even in the famous world championship match between Karpov and Korchnoi, this opening was played successfully. Good opening to play with. Not a very popular opening at the World Championship this time. For the last 3 decades, some other openings have been I have overtaken, but this move position remains very interesting position, and a very sharp position where if white doesn't want to make a draw, then it's going to be a very tough game for both the sides. It's not a easy play for both sides. You have to be alert from the very beginning. So let's come to the game. Comparatively rare variation. I remember I faced this move exactly 41 years back, and I haven't faced this move after that. So a complex line, and I'm sure that the young Indian doesn't know this. So okay, C3, a solid variation, a good theoretical variation. Yes, I think something similar to what Korchnoi played, or this variation is known as the white setup is known as the Tarrasch variation of the French defense, named after Dr. Sigbert Tarrasch, world number 2, and he played quite a few world championship matches, but he couldn't be the world champion. One of the strongest players in the world, say a century back, and one of the greatest theoreticians who has more than one opening. He has one opening in his name and one variation in his name, and a lot of contribution to chess strategy. So let's look at this simple variation. White has chosen a simple line, but yes, I think white is at the moment aiming at a simple position rather than a very complex position. A very risky decision. It's not in logical. It's not a logical consequence of the previous moves. If white has chosen to take with the knight on d4, I think the more logical move is to develop the bishop, or to take the exchange the remaining pawn as well, and try to take a grip on the e5 square with a piece. White tries to take a grip of that square with a pawn, and not a very successful idea, I believe. An interesting option though, but yes, it will have its own problem. This pawn is not supported by another pawn. It's good, the pawn on e5 is strong if it's supported by another pawn, preferably a pawn on d4. But since white has a knight on d4, the e5 pawn can be supported only with the f pawn if you want to support it with a pawn. Now, a pawn supported with pawn is really strong because no one could endanger capturing it. No piece could endanger capturing it. Now it's going to be different. Yes. Now it's guarded with the pawn, but so pawn on e5 is safe, but weakness has been caused on the queen side and the king side as well. The e3 square and also the c5 square is no longer under control because white doesn't have a pawn on d4. Little weakened position, although roughly still equal. A nice move creating weakness, forcing black gives up two moves, two tempi as we call, gives up two moves just to weaken the white's position. So black strategy is clear. White has space advantage. Black is creating weakness in white's position so that when black starts attacking those weak squares, white may find it difficult. So white has patience, or black has patience. Objectively, white has no problems in this position, but yes, it gives, it creates a position which is not a simple position to play for either side. White wants to play for attack. So fine, I think both the sides are about to complete development. White is probably slightly better here. Black has wasted a few tempos in order to create weakness. A very risky decision. I think castles would have led to roughly equal position. A move which compels blacks to capture on d4 doesn't seem to make much sense. Black's last move intends to capture on d4, and there is no need to provoke that capture, and weakening on the queen side can be good or could be very dangerous depending on how black takes of it, but weakening of c4 square can become dangerous. Although I think both sides have their own chances. White has chances of king side attack and black has chances of defending successfully, after which black could penetrate through the c file or from the queen side. At the moment, white has no weaknesses and white is ready to attack the king side, but let's see how. White is trying to play on both the sides. Okay, I think it's a possibility, but yes, it could sometimes it could be dangerous because you may not have enough pieces to attack on both the sides. So driving away the knight was one of the plans, one of the ideas. It doesn't really work much. So white moves a bishop to a strange square. Bishop would have been more natural on d3, where it's aiming at the king side. But now the bishop is hitting against d5 point, which is guarded with a pawn. As we were discussing, a pawn which is supported with another pawn is quite safe, and this move doesn't seem to be very fruitful. Black breaks on the queen side, tries to break on the queen side. Black posed the knight in center. White gave up a king bishop. I think this piece was one of the most important piece. This bishop on b3 was one of the most important attacking pieces for white. But now there are various threats for black. Knight wants to come to e3. Black also wants to take the a5 pawn. So somehow white's position is falling apart, but white still has a reasonable chance of a king side attack. So let's see what succeeds. Okay, white somehow doesn't want to improve the position of the knight and the bishop. I think improving the position on knight on bishop was more logical. Trying to put knight on c3 was a good idea, and also trying to find a square for the bishop would have been better than what happened. So white wants to open up the king side. Yes, now it's going to be a dangerous game, but the activity of black's pieces is good enough for black to give some initiative without really allowing white's attack to get started. As you can see, black has already made way through to white's camp. The bishop is going to come to b4, and the other bishop is going to come to a4. The bishop is coming to b5, attacking the rook. The black queen, rook, bishop, particularly d7 bishop, are ready to hit at white's camp, whereas white has no target. White tries to attack, but yet queen attacked, and black has. While white is trying to create vague threats against the king, black is actually taking very concrete measures to attack the pieces. Queen attacked, queen goes to aggressive position, one pawn has been lost. The queen cannot run away supporting the d4 pawns, which means a pawn has been lost, and further loss is likely to occur. A very weak diagonal for white king, the king and queen on the same diagonal, and anytime black bishop lands on the diagonal, it's going to be a big problem. 2 pawns lost for white, and yes. So desperate attempt, white could get back one of the pawns out of 3, but then it would still be several pawns down without any hope. White wants to attack the king, black takes another pawn, so black is now 4 pawns up. Then the rook, white rook is attacked, white moves the rook, queen attacks the rook again, and at this stage white conceded defeat, because there is no defeat to black bishop coming to c6, which will not only win the rook for the bishop but also exchange queens, and we'll see the black will probably have 2 rooks and 6 pawns against white's rook, bishop and just 2 pawns, so 4 pawns down, and a bishop for a rook, certainly not a very great position to play. So the Russian scores his second victory. And now let's go to what happened to board 3. Board 3, another Russian, Alexei Fedorov, playing this. We are watching the second round matches of the second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament being conducted at the IPS Academy. IPS Academy, which has Indore public school as well as a deemed university. It's a university where you have various courses, and it's a beautiful venue for the match. And we see players from 16 countries, as many as 16 countries taking part in this. A player from USA, a player from Russia, some players from Africa, a player from Egypt as well, and Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Almost all parts, all continents except South America and Australia have been covered. So let's look at the third board game. Again, we have a Russian player on the third board as well. So the top seed is Indian, second and third seed are Russians. A very strong tournament. I remember the second board, Grandmaster Savchenko had played in Spain over 2 decades ago, and even Fedorov has been a very active player for several years. Let's now look at the game from the beginning. The game has ended in favor of the Russian. We have here an interesting opening, interesting game, and a game which started with strategical ideas and then culminated into kingside attack as well as central penetration. So we have Alekhya Mukhopadhyay playing against Fedorov, and let's look at Sicilian defense, one of the most popular openings played by black, and suddenly a very interesting system by the Russian. Russian goes for an opening which is not very popular, not very common. It's more common to move the pawn 2 squares rather than 1 pawn. So White is restricting himself to a comparatively slower game, not aiming at a direct advantage, not aiming at a quick advantage. So what does White have in return? White goes for a slower game, which means there's not going to be a lot of activity soon. At the same time, there's going to be a lot of future to play your own game rather than the theoretical games. When you play the well-established openings, you're not playing actually against your opponent. You're probably following a game between Carlsen and Anand, or Anand and Carlsen, and then these are the champions. They're playing for 10 moves or 15 moves and 20 moves, and you're only playing the position after you wish to change it. So this is not real scope of defeating your opponent with your brilliance. You have to depend on the situation which has occurred after you followed the masters. So it's a good, I think, a practical possibility not to go for the standard lines. This line had been played originally played by Russian Grandmaster Mikhail Chigorin, and subsequently played by top players by Dr. Sigbert Tarash, world number 2 once, 100 years back, and of course by several other players. But the one who popularized this system with White, similar setup, is Bobby Fischer, and one of our Indian top players, chess playing prodigy Nihal Sarin, plays this setup. It's called reverse King's Indian attack. The game is likely to transpose into a reverse King's Indian or a King's Indian attack, where White goes for a slower game and hopes to outplay the opponent in a different manner. So we are going at a slower pace of the game. Not a very ambitious opening, but not an inadequate opening. I think black has equalized. An ambitious move, but a move which compels White to take a decision. Black is threatening to win the pawn on e4 because the white pawn on d3 is pinned and the recapture will not be possible. So white is compelled to take a decision to either to capture the white pawn, capture the black pawn with white pawn, which would be a bad move, but then moving the pawn to center, further central square, is a logical way of playing this position and gives a slight advantage to white if black doesn't have any immediate recourse to counter at the center. Black bishop on a6, which was well placed a move before, is no longer well placed, because now there is no chance of the black d pawn taking on e4, which means the bishop is going to remain hitting a target which is much better guarded than being attacked. Black's recourse of counter attack in the opening is to remove the e5 pawn. And how does he remove the e5? How does he or she remove? How do they remove this pawn? It has to be challenged with a pawn. The black pawn in the f line has to attack the white pawn eventually. After moving the attack knight, black would eventually castle and then play f6. But now you see the hindrance. The f6 square weakens the e6 point. The absence of white colored bishop of black, the c8 bishop, its absence at c8 and its presence at a6 is going to be a big problem in the possibility of pushing f pawn to f6. So let's see how the game went. Knight d7, c4. An excellent move, idea of Grandmaster Vasyukov, one of the greatest players of all times. Vasyukov visited India when India conducted her first international chess tournament in 1978 in Tiruchirappalli, and Vasyukov was the one who won this championship, and he played this system in several of his games, and he won these games very comfortably. This is the first time we learned that one could play such a possibility, which is generally doesn't occur in this position. The move not only intends to attack the black's point, d5 point, the pawn, but also intends to making the a6 bishop blunt and blocking the future of the black. Completes the development. d4, a very committal decision. I think opening up the diagonal for white bishop may not be really damaging, but what's damaging is the chance of counter attack is gone, and white gets a powerful outpost for the knight on e4 square, and that could be a very important possibility. Excellent move, knight d2. White was worried about the safety of the f4 of the e5 pawn, because it had no pawn support, and it was in the enemy territory. It's still in the enemy territory, but now it's going to have a support of a pawn, which means that now the e5 pawn is strong. White is free to move the knight to e4 and also plan the queenside break with a3 and b4. So while white has a more concrete plan of action, black somehow will have to suffer without a clear-cut sort of plan, clear-cut idea of what next. White will not be at doubt. White has simple moves, say knight d2 and knight d2 to e4, perhaps another knight to d2 and to f3, a3 and b4, advance on the queen side, bishop to d2. The movement of white's pieces is easier than black's pieces was. At the moment, black is not able to know where the pieces would move. So let's see how the things go. Bishop correctly comes back. Knight is occupying the central square. If you look at white's e4 square and compare it with black's d5 square, one thing, black knight is not in a position to come to d5, and even if it comes to d5, it's not going to occupy that because white is a pawn on c4. But because black doesn't have a pawn on f5, white already has a square in the 4th rank, black's pieces are in 2nd and 3rd rank. Indication of something having gone wrong for black. Something has gone wrong because your opponent has a safe square in the 4th rank, and you don't have a safe square for a piece in the 4th rank yourself. So some slight disadvantage. A move which intends a queenside break is not strategically accurate. Black has to aim for f6 break, however difficult it is. So knight d2, long castle. Okay, ambitious way of playing, which white is going to play a3 and b4. Somehow not a very good place for the black king, not a very safe place. Reason being that white's natural plan is to play a3 and b4. White could play it at the cost of a pawn as well, and when the b file gets opened up, having your king near open file is always worse than having other pieces. King is a low range piece, and this is the most important piece. King will have to, not only the king will have to guard the pieces, but the other forces also will have to go and guard the king. Somewhere king is a piece which needs a lot of bodyguards, and although there are many, let's see, white is intending to break. So black goes. White is willing to give up a pawn. White is given a pawn, as we were discussing. Black dare not take the pawn. A logical move. Black wants to drive away the e4 knight or to open up the position. This is an excellent move, although the idea may not be very good, the earlier planning may not be very good, but what happened, it's the best possibility in this position, although it could weaken the e6 pawn. Now that's a very risky and committal decision. It was possible to take with a piece. Black suffers from space disadvantage, and when you have space disadvantage, exchanging a few pieces always works. Here somehow that option has not been taken. The e6 pawn was perhaps very weak after the capture. It's still going to be weak, and we're going to see white is now ready to open up the position. Black has a lot of difficulties. Black already has a lot of difficulties. The king is not as safe as white. The e6 pawn is weak. The pieces, only one piece in the third rank, and no other piece is able to come to third rank with any sort of positive threat or positive or active position. So just a one-sided position. White goes for a standard strategic plan in this position. If we believe in the modern ideas by Richard Reti, Grandmaster Richard Reti, he was the one who sort of strengthened the idea of not only a blockade but of central squares. And if black plays e5 here, then the white knight on e4 becomes really strong. The best course, but the position is now very bad, because look at white's pieces. White is already activated 4 pieces, and the knight and bishop could be activated in one move. The knight could go to b3, or d2 knight could go to b3, putting more pressure on c5. Not very accurate. It seems that white is doing well. Queen f1, just a safeguarding move, preventing the black pieces from moving. So black has taken the king to a place where perhaps it could be safe, but yes, one doesn't know. White is ready to improve. Black gets a chance to exchange one piece, but again at the cost of some material. Black gave up a pawn because there is no productive sort of improvement, and white is ready to just start attack on the queen side as well, and king side. f6 pawn was becoming very big. Black decides to give up a pawn. White gladly takes the pawn. There is no counterplay. The best defensive piece of black king gets exchanged. The knight on e4 moves to f6, opening up the bishop. Yes, the bishop on g2 is a good defensive piece for white too. Bishop on b7 is a good defensive piece for black. White has taken a decision where he is weakening his own king to weaken the enemy king. So what are the advantages of this capture? White king is still safe even after the exchange of the bishop because of the g3 pawn. Black king is not really safe because the b file is open. That's one of the factors. Other factor is that white knight is threatening to land at d5, which is very annoying, which means that black has to give up a bishop. After the exchange of these bishops, white controls the open file. White is going to play bishop f4. Bishop f4 at the moment not possible because of knight on f3, but bishop could move to h6 perhaps, or any other square. Rook b1 is going to be played, and black is struggling. The best move in the position, bishop d2, simple move. the best defense for black too. White doesn't want to exchange. If white exchanges the rooks, black gets a chance to put knight on f3 eventually. It's going to be very dangerous. White is trying the best counterplay, but the f3 point has been covered twice and it's not going to be further weakened. A simple move. Black plays for some counterplay. And here comes the crux of it, a brilliant piece sacrifice, queen b2, the final fatal error I think. It allows white to penetrate. White gives up a bishop. Apparently black thought that black was doing well because of attack against the d2 point, but now you will see that after the capture of the d2 bishop, white has just given the bishop free with the hope to start attack. And there comes a further sacrifice. White has given up the bishop, taken a knight, so material is equal, but black can be a rook up in one move. The white rook is weak, and yet in this position black resigned. Can you find out what happens in case black takes the rook and black wins? Black is exchange up. Black is a rook up if black takes, but the king is weak and white queen could penetrate to f7, after which the queen could really go to f7 and deliver a checkmate at b7. So we can look at the variation rook into e5 by black. White goes queen f1 to f7, giving a check to the king, which must go to a8, and then white queen from f7 would go to b7, and that would be a checkmate against the black king with the support of the b1 rook. So nice combination, and again third board we saw victory for the Russian. Let's move to the fourth board and see what happened there. Some of the games are over by now. Well, we have a interesting position here, but again the game has ended. Nila Shah, international master of West Bengal, has won this game against Nitin Babu. Let's look at the opening. So this is the fourth board of the round 2 of second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament, which was inaugurated yesterday. It's being played at the IPS Academy Indore, and we have 16 countries participating in this. The top seed is Indian, and second and third seed are Russians. Russia, USA, Egypt, other African countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, all these countries are being represented. We have players from Vietnam as well, and overall 16 countries taking part in the event. I think some of the important other countries participating are Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Ukraine. We have a player, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Sri Lanka. We have an Iran player also, and one player from Belgium. That's quite good because Western European players, there are so many tournaments in the Western Europe that they do not always come and participate in other parts of the world. But yes, we have a player from Belarus, and we have a player, yes, we have a player from South America. I didn't know there's a player from Peru playing. Great. So Australia remains the only continent which has not been represented in this tournament. So we have players from 4 continents. Excellent. And I had not seen Peru taking part. Yes. And South Korea, of course, they made their first appearance at real international level in the Asian Games, and they played some Olympiads, but Asian Games was their first real major participation where they made their presence, and they had some reasonable reasons. We have Belarusia, as we call it in English, or Belarus. And let's look at the game on the first board. It's all Indian game. So game starts with Sicilian defense. Sicilian defense is one of the most difficult openings to play, and generally as a result, it's one of the best weapons in the hand of a player who plays well on that day. It could be the worst tool for your opponent. It could be the tool which could be really worse for you if you didn't do well. So a double-edged opening where the percentage of win and loss is very high. So, okay, you play Sicilian, you play well, and you could win even against the strongest player in the world. And if you played bad, you could probably lose to a player whom you have never lost with. So a very sharp opening. Nilas goes for this. Since it's a second round of the 10 round tournament, we're going to watch this tournament up to 16th on some days like today we have 2 rounds. We have a game which started at 10 a.m. which is likely to go on till 2 p.m. and then we have next round, third round starting at 4 p.m. which is likely to go on till about 8 o'clock in the evening. So we have 2 games today, and then after that we have 1 round a day. Sometimes we have 2 rounds a day. So it's going to be, we are going to be here for 9 days and 8 days, and we're going to see 10 rounds, and the things are now heating up, and we see towards the last part of the tournament players are going to play for the championship. At the moment they're only trying to win the game as it is done. When you move towards the end of the tournament, then you make specific strategies as how I'm going to beat this particular player, how am I going to go for the crown. But at the moment, to be at the top, being at the top with the top players, that is the idea. So a very interesting opening. Nitin Babu goes for an opening which is called Rosolimo attack. Rosolimo, one of the greatest attacking players around the Second World War and post-Second World War time, one of the greatest attacking players. This opening is named after him, and this is the way he conducted his attack. The purpose is to exchange a few pieces but develop quickly. What's the logical, what could be the logic for an attacking player to exchange pieces in the opening? The logic is, I develop my king side pieces, you're compelled to develop your queen side piece, which means I'm going to castle quickly, I'm going to take my king into a castle in a fort quickly, which means I'm ready to open up the center and I'm going to try to catch the throat of your king while your king is caught in the center, or even if you castle. So purpose is to develop the pieces quickly so that the king side development is over, the white king moves to safety by castling, and then white is trying to win the game quick. So yes, there are many games which end in 18 moves which ended in 18 moves and 20 moves in this opening, but at the same time, when black was able to defend this position, black has also won some very fantastic games with black. I think one of the best players in this particular line is Vishwanathan Anand, our own world champion, who have played very interesting games, particularly against the Michael Adams of England in their match. And Garry Kasparov has also played this successfully, and Carlsen has made some very interesting ideas. He has found some very interesting ideas in this opening from both the sides. So Carlsen plays from white, Carlsen plays from black, and he wins from both the sides. So leaving people guess what is the secret of this opening, what is the strategy of this opening, and what is the secret of winning in chess. The line which creates maximum complications and avoids simplification. Putting the bishop would lead to a quieter game and the better chances of the game leading to a draw. This opening invariably leads to a result, and let's see how a fashionable line these days. Wasn't the idea of Rosolimo, but this is now a brand. It's a sort of modern brand of an old idea, and one could call it a remix rather. And white combines the strategic ideas of modern days with the attacking era, or the era in which players played only for the enemy's king. So black compels you, white preserves a piece. Yes, a retreat loses a tempo. At the same time, black hasn't done very something great productively. The position is very flexible, and at this stage, difficult to say. Nobody has any advantage. White has some development advantage. White is likely to have a typical open Sicilian with a pawn move to d4 soon, where the development advantage could lead to a quicker attack. Black is going to keep the position closed for some time so that white is not able to attack it quickly, and then it's going to be a battle where black is trying to hit white's central pawn on e4, and white is going to try to advance and attack the king. It's after both the players castle and white plays d4, this possibility is likely to occur. So we are too early at this. Black goes for a interesting move. Black tries to discourage the move d4, although it's possible to play, and it's the correct move here, I think. Yes, d4 played, pawn into pawn, knight, queen into pawn. It was also possible to take with the knight, but then it would have weakened the e4 point. So queen on d4. I think this is a standard opening as well, but with this would have been a strong opening for white if white pawn was on c4 instead of a4. Had the white pawn on c2 been on c4 and the pawn on a4 been on a2, that would have been a great position for white. But now with knight on c3 and pawn on c2, it's not really great. Black is likely to get the advances e5 and d5. Pawn advance e5 and d5 would come eventually, and black would have a better center soon. Many top games are played in this exact position, but as the things stand, Carlsen had chosen not to play similarly once. So black is fine. Black is making the plan, an excellent plan. White has, you can see that white is making the moves which are not unreasonable, but black already has a space advantage. Why should black get a space advantage? White's pieces are awkwardly placed because of the space advantage, space disadvantage, as well as the scope of the pieces. I think when both the sides have developed, the scope of the pieces is important. The rook on d1 has excellent scope. It's keeping check on the d6 point. It's attacking that. Knight on c3 has a check at the d5 square, but it cannot move because the c2 pawn is weak. The queen on e3 is poorly placed, but it's there by compulsion, not by choice, because had the queen been somewhere else, the e4 central pawn would have been lost. The clumsy piece is knight on f3. It's a clumsy piece. If it goes to h4 and f5, it could be one of the greatest attacking pieces. So that's the magic in chess, that a clumsy piece in two moves could be one of the strongest pieces. So we have a very interesting battle. Direct knight h4 was a possibility here probably, and black would have to play g6. So let's see if that was played. I played knight to d2. Okay, more or less a strategic game. White wants to put the knight at c4 and e3 eventually after moving the queen to a good square. White is going to safeguard the e4 pawn with bishop if required. Knight h4 is a more ambitious line. I'm sure this is a known position and players knew this position. If I was to play over the board, I might have played knight h4 here, but since top players have played this, I'm not aware of this particular position. I would still, for a blitz game or a bullet game, I would still go with knight h4, and I think it could be very interesting. Castles, knight c4. More or less strategic trade. This position was studied best by Soviet grandmasters, Boleslavsky, and subsequently Furman and Geller, and then the real master of this pawn structure was Anatoly Karpov, world champion, who really won almost all the games in this pawn structure with white side. And in fact, Kasparov never played this pawn structure against Karpov even once. So that's also a very important factor, that sometimes some players develop specific skill in a particular position, and that is what we see. If the players have specific skill in this position, they are likely to do better. I personally prefer black a bit. I don't like white's position, but if white could really get knight on e3, then white would be in a strong position. If the knight on e3 is fine, if the knight has to go to f5, then not a very best way of bringing it, because white would be wasting a couple of moves. If you really wanted to go to f5, a right course was knight h4 if it worked, and knight d2, knight c4, knight e3, and knight f5 could be 2 tempos down, but knight on e3 could be effective, and as we'll see, white's plan becomes clear. Well, a risky move to keep the black knight away. Normally, moving the b pawn in Sicilian open positions is very dangerous. The c file is open. The points c4 and c3, which could require pawn support, now they will be denied of a pawn support now, which means that these two knights suddenly become vulnerable because of this move. Black plays look at this position. Black is simply building the position, and white is trying to do something which is actually resulting into weakening of the position. So now